The sun rises on a shattered Europe. As a result of centuries of unrest since the fall of Rome, counts the world over have taken control over their pots of land. All there is in these dark ages are an innumerable crowd of free lords in their simple forts, manors, and castles. They face no consequences for their actions, from above or below. As a result of this general anarchy, many of them are unfathomably cruel, working their serfs to the bone and abusing them and their dignity in myriad ways. Tied to the land, the people have no further recourse for the remediation of their suffering beyond their immediate oppressors. On the 1st of January 867, one of these tyrants, Count Papo of Henneberg, faced the consequences of his abuses. He was known throughout the Wendish region of northern Europe for being a wicked man, who filled his cup with mead bartered from the Vikings in exchange for slaves, and filled his court with debauchers of the worst sort. It was said that as the peasants reaped wheat, he reaped peasants, and all was thus in order beneath God's eyes. One day, however, he overdrew the indulgence of his abuses. Count Papo was patrolling the fields of his county, Thuringen, as he often did early in the mornings, and in the shadow of the keep he found a woman, legs pinned beneath a downed horse. He called his men around him and lifted the beast. At first she, a woman named Ermengarde, was dumbfounded and grateful. But soon her relief was turned over in the pit of her stomach to terror when the fat and stinking lord gripped her by the roots of her hair and began to drag her towards the keep. She knew what awaited her within the walls, and fought as hard as she was able. Her betrothed was away on the other side of the keep, working in the smithy, but they could just make out her screams, and came running, knowing it was already too late. When they approached the gate, in full sight of the quiet and mournful serfs of Thuringen, she was able to find purchase in the high grass that grew near the walls, and took hold of a splintered pole, left over some time ago by a forgotten project. At first, she tried plunging it into the earth to anchor herself, but hearing the rattle of the massive doors, she knew that she was out of time. She whirled herself around and thrust it into his thigh. For the first time, his screams echoed off the walls of the keep. Count Papo drew a small, thin blade from his boot. Everybody stopped their work. They felt the weight of the tools in their hands, the firmness of the wood, the sharpness of their blades. Before he was able to make that fatal slice, him and his guards were suddenly and abruptly overcome by a human wave of fists, tools, and blood, her betrothed at the helm. On that day, the 1st of January 867, Count Papo was overthrown by the oppressed peasantry in a sudden and abrupt eruption of outrage. Leading them was Amadeus, that very blacksmith who was chosen from among them to take the seat that the wretch left empty. Having no last name, he took on the surname von Bauer, meaning of the peasants, so that not he nor any who doubted him forgot who he truly was. He had to take on a house sigil as well, which took him many days. Not many of his compatriots knew or understood the rules of heraldry, and so had a bound and beaten courtier, whose specialty was actually in the trading of slaves, explain the rules thereof. Eventually, Amadeus chose 3 yellow stars on a red field, representing the precious virtues of struggle, honesty, and humility, and the blood needed to preserve them in a world of temptations. Amadeus was also a zealous Cathar, opposing the Catholic Church and treating his women with the respect given men. So the first in line to inherit was his wife, Ermengarde, that very woman who was nearly brought low by the wicked Count, and who was now the mother of their freedom. This was a compromise, as though the people wished her to take a more active role, she personally had no great desire for leadership. Later that month, amongst the confused debates surrounding the practice of governance, it was decided that the county should operate as a tanistry, so as to give the electors power over who would ascend to the throne, avoiding the hereditary despotism which had been the genesis of their abuse at all costs. With all the armed peasants who rose up, numbering in the thousands, some even leaving neighboring manors to join liberated Thuringen, Amadeus von Bauer decided to bring as many territories into his fold as possible, so as to free the neighboring peasantry from their oppressive feudal lords. Beyond ideals, this would prove to be wise in the long run, as his neighbors would soon find the very existence of his inversed state an affront to them, and would seek any excuse to destroy him and his people. In February, the first news of the outside world was received at the new court that the Order of St. Anthony was formed in Ethiopia, sworn to protect Coptic Christians and purge infidels. Very little of this made sense to the people who heard it, and had to be explained to them by the messenger, but nonetheless, the very fact that they were receiving news like this at all was proof of their legitimacy, that they as a county ran by peasants had a right to exist in the first place. On his conquests, Amadeus earned a scar along his chest during his first siege, but remained determined to make it to the sea. What little he knew of governance, he had often heard it said that wealth often traveled from port to port. Winning battles by right of determination and sheer numbers, he began to etch his name in history. In October, a Jew fleeing terrible persecution in a neighboring county named Mir Farama was welcomed into the court of Thuringen as a skilled steward, a man of knowledge and skill the peasants desperately needed. In 869, the Duchy of Thuringen was rechristened as Bauern, roughly translating to Land of the Peasants. It was around this time that a Cathar priest was finally appointed, and the work of converting the people to the true Cathar faith began in the Duchy of Bauern. A man of wide tolerance and acceptability, even he lived by the standards of his faith. By October of 872, Amadeus von Bauer had nearly brought Bauern to the sea. The last obstacle was the Catholic theocracy of Bremen, ruled by the cruel Cardinal Egbert. Egbert and his excesses were more veiled, and the result of his allowances to his priests and his knights to indulge their own cruelty, so long as he got the exact and specified taxes from his serfs. He was soon overcome, tossed from the roof of his church, and Bremen became the first port of Bauern. In November, Amadeus sired his first child, his son Ivo. In September, far to the east in the land of Irkes, the chieftain there was overthrown by a Manichaean revolt leader by the name of Atrak, who began the work of reviving the Gnostic tradition there. The Manichaeans believed that the world is evil, created by the Demiurge, and that Jesus was a messenger from the true God, the Monad, meant to open the way for Gnosis and eventual escape from this world of suffering. Upon hearing this, Amadeus sent his blessing as a fellow heretic of a different stripe. The fact that one of the only people that Amadeus could count on having friendly relations with was a heretical nomad on the other side of the world was concerning to his court and weighed heavy in their minds. The chiefdom to the east was renamed Atrakid, and now held a passively good opinion of Bauern. After 3 more successful wars, Amadeus von Bauer earned the moniker of the Brave for his daring exploits, which many thought beyond the abilities of a man born of common stock. In August of 877, former Thuringen courtiers who managed to escape returned to the county and tried to stoke a revolt, which was quickly cut down by their former serfs. By 880, the first footholds of power began to form in shattered Europe, such as Novgorod under Yaroslav Stepanovich to the north, and the Atrakids under Atrak the Scholar to the east, and, most notably, Bauern under Amadeus the Brave. In further detail, each of these nascent realms was known for something in particular. Novgorod was master of northern trade and only challenger to raiders from the frigid north. The Atrakids were known for their horsemanship and semi-nomadic lifestyle, but beyond that, their strange Gnostic religion, considered by most to be a cult. Finally, there was of course Bauern, with which the contents of this chronicle are concerned. In 883, the Viking chief of Holdernesse, King Sif the Holy, located on the British Isles, declared war on Bauern, seeking territory on the mainland. King Sif had also once done business with Count Papo and was desirous of more human property, which was what largely stoked the invasion in the first place. 21,000 men from the north landed at Bremen, severely outnumbering the peasant army of 6,000. Amadeus the Brave had to ignore the other 2 wars he was fighting at the time and focus on repelling the Nordic threat. So, faced with this issue, he hired thousands of mercenaries, nearly bankrupting the young court in the process. The 6,000-strong peasant army barely escaped the pursuit of the invading force and met up with the mercenaries. The Vikings occupied wherever they set foot. In their mercilessness, they would plunder whatsoever they deemed worthy of their wrath, ravaging churches and shrines with special vigor. Once they captured that province which the Bauern army fled, they gave chase, and now the people were ready to face their invaders. Both armies amounting to 20,000 strong, the forces of the peasant crown awaited to repel the brutes. They met in Anhalt, next to the capital of Thuringen. The fighting was inhuman. The men of Holdernesse, with murder in their veins, seemed an insurmountable challenge to men who were only very recently slaves. However, through the use of archers and fast infantry which could outflank their attackers, the Vikings were broken, and then pursued to Magdeburg to be shown the people's might. Making use of their swift river-navigable boats, they narrowly escaped and fled further to Stormarn, where 1,000 berserker reinforcements were sent to aid them, a paltry 5,000 survivors, who themselves decided to flee. Those who wore the dreaded Valknut turned their backs and returned across the sea to their wicked isle, as they were soundly taught better than to challenge mighty, united Bauern.